I'm Nate Rickert. I am the Director of Planning and Development for City of Lebanon. I've been here for about a year and a half. Prior to that, I was lived in Connecticut, worked in Rhode Island, and then I came out from Iowa in 2017, where I spent most of my career. I have the dubious honor of having served in the Iowa legislature for 6 years in the middle aughts. So quite an interesting background, but and not a traditional planner in the sense of I didn't go to planning school. I went to business school, but trying to approach topics, especially coming from a housing perspective. My family built a lot of houses. That's what we did for 3 generations until the market finally decided to tell us that we needed to go find other things to do for a living in order to feed our families. So a very different perspective sometimes that I'll bring to the table. But I always say I've sat at all of the chairs around the room when it comes to meeting with people who are looking to do developments, whether it's the person who's literally putting their family fortune on the table on a real estate deal that if it's successful, it feeds the family for 5 to 10 years. If it's not successful, well, it's not successful. At the end of the day, that's a slightly different perspective that I bring sometimes. But it's been a great time working with NOAA and the folks at the state planning office with HOP grant that we have received here in Lebanon, and we'll get into that in much more detail as we go forward. But really, my takeaway is that for the first time in many years, we're talking about housing and the need for housing in a major way, and that's really shaping the conversation here in Lebanon as well as across the state, across the country, really. As we've decided that, hey, we need to start building houses again. Sarah?
Great, thank you, Nate. Good afternoon, everybody. Sarah Marchant from the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. And we'll just get started here. I'm happy to be here this afternoon. So I think probably many of you have seen this slide before, and many of you probably have family members, colleagues, employees, and people who are directly affected or have their own story about their challenge in finding housing in the Granite State right now. This isn't new, but it is certainly worse. And I think 5 years ago, we were like, oh, I can't imagine it getting worse. And you know what? It is much worse, unfortunately. And so it is here to talk. We are here to talk about some potential options and innovative ideas of how we do things a little bit differently, because the way we've been doing them has brought us exactly here. And so we have to think about ways, and there's no more time to wait to start implementing solutions that are a little bit different than we have done in the past. Next slide, please, Noah. Thank you. So just as a little bit of structuring, 69% of all the homes in the state of New Hampshire are single family homes. So 63% are your traditional single family detached. And then there's single family attached homes for another 6% there. That is true, and that really served our former population really well. What's interesting today, and what is significantly different, is that over 70, almost 75% of all the homes in New Hampshire do not have children in them. 75%, and 42% of all renter households are single person households. So one of the biggest mismatches we have is the smaller size of actual households with the size of the homes that are available on the market. We also have a mismatch in what's being built, in that there's, with the significantly shrinking household size, it's really important for us to think about things that might not be what's perfect for you, but might be what's perfect for some other people who are already part of our communities, who are struggling to find housing, or who are living with family members, or commuting really long distances, because we don't have this options available to help make sure everybody has safe, affordable housing. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a bit about missing middle housing, and probably many of you have seen this slide before from CNU or Opticos. And so what you see is on the far left-hand side is your more traditional single-family housing. And then on the far right-hand side would be much more of the apartment building style. But one thing that's kind of missing from a lot of our communities outside of our beautiful core downtowns is this whole idea of missing middle and all the options of housing typologies that are available in the middle. And so we're going to dive into a couple of those today, in ways that are already being used, and some new ways that we're looking at those throughout the state. So jumping next slide, please, and I'll turn it over to Nate with that.
Yeah, this is one of those points. This is the centerpiece of what is the center green in downtown Lebanon. We have a similar situation in West Lebanon, where we have a very dense old neighborhood built around servicing sort of the traditional factory model of a community. You've got Town Hall in the middle, you've got the Coburn Park, and you've got some very dense neighborhoods. Yeah, as the previous discussion was talking about, we basically made the creation of a neighborhood like this perfectly illegal. You cannot build housing like this in most communities across, whether it's New Hampshire or across the country. Slowly creeping away, we've imposed suburban values on our old downtowns. There are perfect examples of parking regulations that are applying to commercial buildings in parts of our communities that were built when horse and buggy was what dominated what was going on with the economy, as opposed to automobiles. We didn't design our buildings to meet horse and buggies, but now we design our buildings to meet cars. So modes of transportation have greatly impacted our ability to rethink a lot of our inner cities, and in whether it's, in Lebanon, it's a community of about, we think, somewhere around 16,000 now. We've been growing at a mighty clip over the last few years, because we have the largest employer in the state in the form of DHMC. DHMC presently has about 1,200 to 1,500 jobs that are currently unfilled. Most of them are here in the Lebanon hospital, and we simply don't have any place for those folks to live. And the other element of that that's really shaping our local concern is the fact that after they spend their residency, after they spend their 2 or 3 or 4 years of time getting educated, they find maybe their life partner, they want to start a family, and what happens is as soon as they finish that education is the moment that is the most vulnerable for DHMC, because that's when people have an opportunity to move anywhere, literally in the country and perhaps the world, to put the skills that they've just learned to use. DHMC wants to keep them here because they want to have them contributing to the hospital. The problem with it is that there are very few houses that most of those folks can afford, if they can get a house at all, because there's such an intense pressure on the real estate market. It is basically, as I would say, having bought a house in the market last spring, the nuclear core of buyer risk is purely out, exposed to the atmosphere at this point. It's just pure risk. You're buying a house, you know nothing about the history. You're waiving all of the inspections. You're waiving all of the things that we would normally have as stopgaps in the market as ways to protect buyers and prevent sellers from taking advantage, are lost. It's kind of going down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but what it goes back to is we have town centers and suburban zoning. We've imposed values of the suburban world onto our neighborhoods that just simply were built primarily in the late 1800s, post-Civil War, to 1920. You see these two neighborhoods in Lebanon. West Lebanon is on the left. Lebanon proper is on the right. They're both condensed, very dense, traditional, New England village neighborhoods. And these are the pattern areas. One of the things we've done with our HOP grant here is we created a pattern zoning study, and we'll get into that a little more. But this is the area that we're going to be studying as a part of our pattern zones, with the thought of how can we get the zoning ordinance out of the way to be able to get more density and allow for more development within these more existing neighborhoods in a way that is, in keeping with the tradition of these neighborhoods. We all talk about character. Well, legitimately, I think character boils down to is what house would I be able to tolerate if my neighbor took that open lot and built a house on it? That's what the pattern zoning study is trying to look at. How can we do, one, get zoning out of the way. And that's going to be a major reform effort. We're underway. We're looking for that deliverable to be coming from our study group over the next month or two. Lebanon is a city, so we have a very unique process for how we approve zoning changes, which was a bit of a surprise to the consultants because they had never heard of such a thing. We have an homage to the old town meeting, which basically says if you're going to rezone a residential area, it has to go in front of the public in the form of a referendum in conjunction with the March elections for the city council. So what happens is you have a zoning reform effort that begins in the fall in October. We send it through all of our boards, our commissions, the planning board, the zoning board, the conservation commission, public hearing at city council, so on and so forth. A lot of potential engagement. City council then gets the right in January to put that on the ballot. And then when it gets to the ballot, it's just who wins, like it's the old town hall. How many people, those who show up make law. And in this case, those who show up to vote make law. So what we're hoping to have happen is to be able to take our pattern zone recommendations, because 65% of these two neighborhoods are non-conforming and that's only by dimension. We didn't look at use. We didn't look at density of the lot. The one thing that always kind of gets left off of the equation most of the time is we think clearly about setbacks, 10 feet here, 20 feet there, 40 feet there, depending upon the size. But the two pieces that really do relate to how we get to more density are the lot size itself, but also what's the density? Is it lot coverage? Is it the amount of impervious surface? How, zoning ordinances are going to work in different ways. But in the end, if you take a 10,000 lot standard and then you say you can only build a house or a building on 25% of that lot, you just shrunk the footprint of that potential buildable lot to a much, much smaller piece. And I think when you look at our urban neighborhoods, you have a lot of variables that we're going to have to impose and allow our urban neighborhoods to say, we are an urban neighborhood. We don't deserve to be treated like, the suburban zoning of the 1970s and 80s. We don't need that imposed on an architectural style and an organization of a city that was built 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when horses and carriages were the dominant mode of transportation, if not just straight up walking. So I think when we look for our study area, our pattern zone study, which is our HOP grant that we were able to achieve, we sort of maxed out, but the ask, but there's three pieces of the pattern zoning ask. The first one is let's identify the pieces of the puzzle to get zoning out of the way to allow for more density in our smaller, more compact neighborhoods. And those two neighborhoods we were just looking at on the previous slide. The second deliverable, the pattern zoning, is going to be a series of architecturally designed houses. We started with a group of about 90 that came from the consultants, and the consultants it's a team of architects from across the country who are doing design work. We'll have a licensing agreement with them for a period of 3 years. That licensing will include 20 plan sets that will be complete plan sets ready to be built, and they're pre-approved by the building department. From our perspective as a staff, we've already looked at all of these plan sets. From a technical perspective, they're going to be approved. We're still going to have to add a few things to that. A site plan regulation or site plan is going to need to be put on, the house has to be put onto a site plan. But in the end, it's a pre-approved package that anybody in one of those study areas can pull this design. It's free to them to use because the city has paid the licensing fee for the architectural firm, and they'll be able to use that plan set to build their new home. Ideally, and this is also one of the things we were adding on, and I met with one of the local building companies, building supply companies, last week. We will likely be looking at taking some of these architectural plans and giving them to our supply houses to say, give us a takeoff, give us in effect, a cost estimate for what it's going to be able to get the supply lines for building these homes. So that as somebody is looking through the catalog, not only do they have the architectural design that they're looking for, but they also have an informed definition as to what it's going to take from a supply list. This is what you need to do. This is one of my favorite the upper right-hand house, which I think that the traditional 1920s-esque sort of cottage style house, which I lived in a home almost identical to this, younger in a few years ago. And that house was literally delivered on a rail car by Sears. You just ordered it. It showed up. You had some folks pick it up off of the rail car and drag it to the site that you wanted to have it built, and the craftsman came and started putting it together. Again, it's trying to have that sort of a simple approach to housing, where we are able to have good design from a catalog that's pre-approved, pre-engineered, all ready to go. We have the ability to attach that to some sort of supply line, so that we say, I want this option. You press the button, and the next thing you know, all of the things that you need to build that house arrive in a timely fashion. And the next piece that we don't have, and this is I think one of the untalked about issues that we run into when it comes to building housing in New Hampshire, is that for 10 years we didn't build housing as a country. And usually the largest economic engine in any community is the construction industry. That construction industry contracted greatly from 2009, 2010, during the Great Recession, when we stopped building housing, the economy ground to a halt. That the people that were making their living off of that went and did something else, and they're not returning to that industry. And what we have is a huge and simple dearth of people that are qualified craftspeople that are capable of working on a building a house, whatever that trade may be. And I think that's going to be workforce is just as, not only from the standpoint of workforce housing is as an issue that feeds into DHMC, but it's also workforce for qualified labor of people that are going to be working in the trades, people that can go hang windows, people that can do framing, people that can pour a foundation. We just simply at this point do not have the capacity necessary to be able to build the number of houses that we need, especially here in the Upper Valley. We're seeing a lot of our contractors that are bringing subcontractors in from Concord, Manchester, all the way in from Massachusetts, because it's easier to find that workforce in another marketplace than it is here. And if you don't have indigenous people that are building housing, you don't have that skilled craftsman base. That's a very difficult spot, because who's going to build these things? We can get them all prepared, but at the end of the day, we have to have somebody who's swinging a hammer and as I always say, putting kerosene into a salamander at 3 o'clock in the morning because you had a cold snap and you got a concrete foundation that you don't want it to freeze. Those are things that not a lot of folks have wanted to get into in recent years, because number one, we weren't building any housing, but number two, it was tough to make a living. I think that's going to be one where we have to appreciate that we're going to need more workforce if we're going to be able to build the housing that we need. But we go back to the house on the left here is one of the examples of one of the pattern zone houses. It was brought to us by one of our architects. Can't say it's my favorite. We last week started the process of widowing down the 90 houses. Staff went through and we marked them 1, 2, and 3. 1 being, we want to see this in the book. 2 being, we could live with it if we had to. And 3 being, I don't want that anywhere near my neighborhood and nor my city. And we've given that feedback back to the consultant group. Hopefully they'll be coming back with a pattern of about 50 different options. Those 50 different options will then be presented to the community in a series of community events, community engagement events in the month of June, where we'll be able to take those along with, many of them will have actual models, the old-fashioned architectural models, so that you can kind of see what they look like in a third dimension. And then we'll take that to a community meeting and we'll say, what do you like? What do you don't like? And that puts us in a situation where we have a sort of community level vetting of the architectural plans that are going to be, presented and available to all of the folks in the neighborhood. I think that's going to be a very interesting evening. I'm looking forward to that conversation. I'm hoping we can have a large, robust group of people that are there to engage. Because the more people that can be involved in that, the better off we're going to be. The typologies that we're going to be having within this group of 20 houses are going to be everything from literally the detached ADU cottage that's 450 to 500, 600 square feet that you put in the backyard. There'll be plan sets that have, the garage under with the apartment above, as I would like to say, the Fonzie ADU, because Fonzie lived in an ADU, for those of you who can remember watching Happy Days back in the day. I think we'll have a series of those. We'll have some duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes so that we can have a little bit of variety there. That's not going to be the main focus, but we'll have a couple of options there. Some single family detached. Those single family detached will also include what I think of as the South Carolina Charleston shotgun house that you can fit on a narrow lot. We'll have some of those options. So again, having the ability to make smaller lots that you can cleaver a lot, cut it in half, and be able to put an infill house on that double lot or that lot and a half that was left from the legacy of the neighborhood. The key to that is that we're going to have significant zoning reform in order to allow for smaller lots. Right now, 10,000 square feet is sort of our smallest lot that we allow. We're going to be looking at taking that to really proportions. We'll run this by community involvement, but the low number is as low as 2,500, which is probably a little small. And probably will end in the 5,000 to 6,000 range, which is a typical size lot for our older inner city lots. Allowing that to be again made legal so that we can build in more infill housing, and then also adding more density from the standpoint of having more ADU creation. Again, the ADU piece is the two marry together, where we allow for, you can put different types of housing types together in a small space and allow those to sort of organically grow into a neighborhood. And all of a sudden, you've got a lot more housing units than what you had before. And again, it was one where some of the great experiments have been happening. I think you look to Los Angeles, California right now, and they've done a huge piece with their ADUs. My favorite way of describing it is the LA version is the granny flat in the backyard. That granny flat, where hopefully we'll be able to have architecturally approved, pre-engineered, architecturally approved, designed houses that you can just pull off the shelf and put up in the backyard in a fairly quick and short order. That's what we're hoping to find from our pattern zone study. We've got different moving pieces. The deliverable will be due the end of in July of this summer, and then we run into trying to get it passed in the fall and into the end of March. We'll find out. We'll get our final determination in March of 2025 when we have our referendum. I would also add in, this is one of the issues that we are facing here in Lebanon is we have a conservation commission that has a impact fee driven war chest for buying conservation land of about $1.5 million. And what we're seeing in recent years is that the first option that most landowners are having is that the first thing they do is they go talk to the Conservation Commission and they ask the Conservation Commission to purchase the land that they are selling so that it can go into set aside. What we're looking at here are the ones that are directly either in that conservation piece. Some of these are naturally should be exactly what they are, set aside forever. There's unique properties that are about them that really are amazing and should be protected. I think we also have a lot of factors that come into play here. But the issue that we've been running into is the availability of land to develop into something other than what it currently is, be it housing or some sort of commercial use. Likely housing is what we're looking for. If the first buyer gets the opportunity is the Conservation Commission and they take it off the market, there's not going to be housing there. It's just simply going to be going into the conservation set aside. And with that, we are not able to get housing. One of the other factors that comes into play is the ability to develop land also comes along with when will land be available to be developed. And if it's already set aside in conservation, if it's owned by a family that's not interested in selling for any reason, it's called capitalism, folks. You don't have to sell if you don't want to. That puts us in a situation where the actual availability of land to develop any strategic place where there is utility services, where you do have sewer and water available, where you do have the capacity to, from a topography, you don't have steep slopes, it's not wet. you start taking those pieces out of the puzzle and you start running into fairly large swaths of the community are either taken off the table by just simply the geography that they are, the fact that they're too far away from any kind of utility services, and you're not going to run sewer out into the middle of a green field typically, or they have been purchased up by the Conservation Commission. It's limiting greatly the ability to find any land that's available. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of large institutional landowners in Lebanon are actually now who we are talking about saying, what can you do to help make a contribution to this housing crisis? Because we need land to work with. If we don't have land to work with, we can't build houses. And you are, by the way, the largest landowner in our community is either Dartmouth College directly or DHMC or a combination thereof. And they are the ones that are most directly impacted by the fact that we don't have the housing. So we're starting to see DHMCs. We've got a great conversation going with them, some great projects that are underway. But I think realistically having some of those conversations with those landowners and saying, we need to start looking at development and doing it in a way where it is meaningful for the community. So first and foremost, having our conservation commissions not just buy everything they can buy, because that's what their first initial reaction may be. It needs to be, is this really a logical place that we need to have? Does it fit into a conservation protection plan? Does it fit into wildlife corridors? Does it fit into those things that we all want to value and protect? But at the same point in time, or is its highest and best use to be developed and turned into housing? And if it is, should be housing, then we should pass with the dollars that are sitting there in the Conservation Commission's trust that allow them to be oftentimes the first buyer that comes into the conversation. So again, balancing community interests can be really difficult, and then availability of land becomes the next piece of that missing puzzle that sometimes we forget to talk about. Sarah, I'll let you explain this one a little bit because this is more your piece.
This is, yeah, thank you guys. And I have my camera off because I think my connection's not great. I hope you can all hear me okay. So I don't know, for those of you who don't know, Hollis and Brookline are actually abutting towns. Of course, I couldn't find a map that actually shows their abutting lands. But what you can see from these two maps is the two edges that are close to each other do abut, is that there's been a very deliberate and thoughtful process of acquiring conservation lands, both in Hollis and in Brookline. But actually, if you look on the Brookline one, as it goes to some of the neighboring areas through Milford and Mason, these areas of preservation, the areas in green that were designed that were designed to be permanently conserved, are very thoughtful wildlife corridors. They're thoughtful trail systems, and they're designed to be connected across communities and across the region. And so I just wanted to show some really good examples of conservation that's coordinating for wildlife corridors, for high quality land for conservation permanently, and how thinking them through and connecting to the larger communities is a great way to prioritize conservation land versus other land. The other thing to really look at here is both of these communities have about 20% of their land area permanently conserved. And as we are moving forward, which is incredible, right? It's a really, really good thing when it's done in a thoughtful way. But as Nate was talking about, as we get another 20 years down the road or another 30 years down the road, we need to be thinking about how much land do we want to permanently conserve versus how much do we want to have for housing. And if we conserve more land, is there a balance that we're going to have to do with density in the land areas that are left to help balance some of that out? Because we can't have communities if we don't have homes and people to live in them. Go ahead, you can keep going. Thank you, Noah.
Okay. So we have two studies that we're currently underway in Lebanon right now. We have our pattern zoning study, which is our HOP grant, and it is continuing to move forward at a pretty good pace, hopefully with the deliverable this summer, and then the political world takes over and we work on passage of zoning reforms that are associated there too through into March. The second study that we have is the 120 corridor. if you come up with a great name for this, we'd love to have it, because there's really not a great natural way to describe what we're looking at here. It's essentially, over the last 15 years, this neighborhood has been a neighborhood that has been where most, of not all, of the housing in Lebanon has been built. It is large apartment style housing. It's designed to house folks that are coming for DHMC, that are here for short periods of time. They're here for their residency. They're here for their training, their medical training. So it's very apartment driven, but at the same point in time, you have a neighborhood that's the zoning and the master plan work that's been done around the 120 corridor all predates a lot of the work of the people that are currently living there. So the thought is to create a more neighborhood centric plan, a neighborhood plan around this corridor that starts asking the folks that actually live there, what is it that you want from your neighborhood? And really, we've had a lot of zoning discussions. There's a certain area in the southern part of this district. It's around the high school. It's right off of Route 8 or exit 18 of the interstate and Route 120 that goes up into Hanover. That neighborhood is really one where it's been a bit of a football from a zoning perspective that's been kicked around over the last, say, 35 years. There's been a neighborhood group or folks that didn't want it to develop in any meaningful way. There's been groups that wanted to have it be housing. So you have lots of competing interests in this neighborhood. And one of the questions, or one of the things that we were thinking as a planning department, is let's go in and ask the people in the neighborhood what they really want in their neighborhood. And then we can help design policies accordingly. And what we found is that the first pieces of this, the community engagement event, which are the two photographs that we have that are up here, we have a very substantial portion of this area that's what we call the Boston lot, that's just to the left. It's a large set aside piece of property. It's going to remain that way. It's a beautiful, lovely place that needs to be preserved, but it also is a great place for animals to be moving to and from. So we have a huge wildlife corridor that connects between, that literally bisects this neighborhood. And what we've kind of determined in the conversations that we've had thus far is, not only is the Route 120 corridor bad for animals and animal car accidents, and the last thing you want to have is deer and animals that are interacting with cars. From a car driver perspective, the deer typically don't have insurance, so that you have to pay for that yourself. It's not so good for the deer either, or the moose or whatever other animal might be in there. So we have a very bad corridor when it comes to animal crossing. Which is another piece of this puzzle. We need to be able to have an animal crossing that makes it rational and reasonable for these populations to get through and across this sort of valley of death. And guess what? People can't cross it either, because it's 4 to 6 lanes of sort of almost highway, interstate level traffic that goes through many parts of this neighborhood, and it literally just cleavers it right in half. It's hard to get a sense of neighborhood when you have a 6-lane highway running right through the middle of it. So that's been part of, New Hampshire DOT is also looking at the Route 18 corridor. They're looking at exit 18 for some, and this whole corridor as to how to best deal with the future of this corridor from an automobile transportation, but also trying to get walkability into this mix, getting into interconnectedness for the folks that are there, but also just asking the people in this neighborhood, what is it that you need in your neighborhood? And part of that is you've got the largest employer in the state that's right in the center of this neighborhood as well. So you've got DHMC, you've got a large set aside, you've got a huge animal crossing, you've got some of the largest swaths of undeveloped land in all of Lebanon that are available for development that are within it. So the 120 corridor plan really is letting us focus on what should we do with the zoning and what should we do to help open up opportunities for more housing. And I think what we're going to see is a real recommendation. We haven't gotten our draft back from the consultants yet, but I think what we're going to see in the conclusion from the public engagement was, we need more housing. We need to open up zoning. We need to let this happen. We're hoping much of this neighborhood was zoned industrial, amazingly enough. But in order to be able to develop residential houses in the industrial zone, we had a PUD that you could get to but only 25% of that land mass was available for housing under this industrial mixed use PUD. And what we found is that that's the way people have been developing. They've gone in, they've done these industrial PUDs, they've built out all of the housing that was possible according to the zoning, and then no industrial pieces have been built. It was basically the only way they could get to, the only way they could get to housing was to go through this sort of loophole within a mixed use neighborhood. And that piece is one that we're going to really heavily look at to say, let's get the zoning out of the way in this case. Why don't we open that up so we can go, instead of 25% of this industrial PUD being housing, maybe we need to make a different zoning and say it's 50% and the other 50% could be some sort of a mixed use, whether it's, light industrial slash, lab space, which is another piece that's of the employers that we have in this neighborhood. They are labs that have derived off of Novo Nordisk is in this neighborhood. We've got lab space that's doing research, and it's people that are spinning things off the hospital research that's then being capitalized and turned into significant products and that are being made in this neighborhood. That's a different type of industrial use than the old-fashioned mill where you had lots of pollution and lots of things going on. And that use fits quite well with fairly heavy residential as well. So we're going to be looking at that mix and say, how can we keep these industrial zones making jobs, which is what we want them to do, but also how can we infuse in that residential use so that we can actually build a lot more density, a lot more housing. And the other piece that we come into is that how do we get some single family detached and potentially a sense of a city center, a way to draw this neighborhood together and define it as a neighborhood, because right now it's just the 120 corridor. Nobody wants to live in the 120 corridor. It sounds horrible, but we need to come up with a good solid name for the neighborhoods that we can build the neighborhood and plan that. In addition to that, what kind of fire services, what kind of police services, recreation services does the city need to provide? Because you don't want to be waiting for an extra 10 minutes for the ambulance to show up when you need a good quick trip. It takes the ambulance longer to get to you than it will be for you to hop in the car to drive to the hospital because you're closer to the hospital than the ambulance is. It's that sort of thinking that the 120 corridor is really leading us to developing that neighborhood plan, allowing us to try to build a sense of community and the neighborhoods that we want to see being built. We've had some good work. Again, the July, August deliverable, and we'll be looking for significant zoning changes that we'll be bringing forward in the fall in working with City Council. Here's another one. A year ago, we passed cottage style zoning that allowed for the creation of a cottage style neighborhood to be created. This is one where, again, it's a great lesson in the fact that we may create the zoning regulations that allow things to happen, but the market has to be able to adapt to that and be able to embrace the changes that we have made. And this is a particularly good example of, I know Sarah has some things she wants to talk about this, but I'll talk about the city has actually looked at our city-owned properties. We have identified 20 properties across the city. Many of those properties are tax sale, anything that for any and all reasons, we are the owner of last resort is typically the city or the town. And what you end up with is properties that when they were acquired by the city or the town, years ago, decades ago, some of these were as many as 75 years ago, that they've just been sitting there and they're not on the tax rolls. They're not doing anybody any good. But at the time that they were let go from the standpoint of the tax sale, there was something wrong with them in a way that didn't make sense for the developer, the owner, to be able to develop the property. And that leaves a potential reservoir for housing, because what was once completely uneconomical to develop is now firmly in the area of being economical to develop. And then when you put in what we've looked at, we've identified a property on Morrow Street, which is, again, it's sort of a combination of tax sale, a little bit left over from when the interstate was built, and we're going to piece that all together, and we're going to create, as the city, a neighborhood based on cottage style design that will be able to be brought forward into the marketplace. Now, the goal with this is we have a huge issue where 70% of the people that work for the city of Lebanon do not live in the city of Lebanon, and most of them can't afford to live in the city of Lebanon. You know, it's the folks that are the firefighters, the school teachers. It's the people that are doing, you know, the police department folks, the DPW folks. I think that's one where it is clear we need to be able to offer some affordable housing options to the employees of the city and the school district. Borough streets, the goal will be we're going to have between 6 and 8 houses, hopefully, is the yield. And the first right of an option to purchase these are going to be given to city employees or school district employees so that we have an option to be able to say to somebody who wants to move here, we have some single family housing that's available, and we'll be able to get you on the list to be able to use this as a tool. Again, 6, 8 houses here, 6, 8 houses there. It does add up over time. But the issue here is that the underlying piece is that the city itself is doing the development and setting the stage for this. We're likely partner with private sector pieces for the construction efforts and the build out. But ultimately, it's one of those where it's traditionally not been thought of as something that a city does. But yet, when you look in the long history of time, it's something that happens often where we have to partner. The city sets the stage, does has a city property. That property doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, it can be donated into the process of the build so that you can help subsidize the build itself. We'll do the layout, we'll do the engineering, we'll do all of those things correctly, and we'll have a finished product that we'll hopefully be able to bring to market. But that's just one example of you can set a regulatory stage, but you have to have a proof of concept, and you have to have somebody who's capable of doing the actual development and making things happen. And sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect between what we do regulatory wise and where we're at with what the market wants to do. I'll turn it back over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Nate. So another example and one that's built, and actually there's, if you were to visit this today, there's the construction is finished. I just don't have quite as new of pictures for one of the neighborhoods, but this is the cottages at Back River Road in Dover. So for proof of concept, exactly as Nate was just showing, this housing project was developed by Harmony Homes. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard about it, but they're an assisted living company on the seacoast that was struggling to get workforce. And so they offered these homes. They are single family homes built in very much a community style, but they're just under 400 square feet, and they bought a piece of property that was 7 acres, and it was originally zoned for 9 homes. If you could advance the slide, actually. And you'll see, so this is the original subdivision layout plan, the one on the left, and you can see it's zoned for 9 homes in one big road. And what Harmony Homes did is they came in and they talked to the city of Dover that has incredibly flexible zoning. I will say this is on water, this is on municipal water and sewer, so we all know this doesn't work exactly right the same way on a well and septic system. But what they got was 44 homes here. And these are rental options, but they are all affordable to 80% of AMI or less. And they have 44 single family homes that's built community. And actually, I know that there was an article just this past week in Foster's, I think in Foster's Daily Democrat, about how this is providing an amazing solution for working people who lived in this area already and have just struggled so much to find housing in the Dover Portsmouth area. So this is it's a great solution in Dover, but it's a really great example of the municipality having some very flexible regulations and working with local developers and people who care about their communities and care about employees and trying to find a unique solution. There isn't anything else like this in New Hampshire, and this has come out really well. Just for context, I like to give an idea of the density. So this is a 17.6 acre site. 4 of the acres are ultimately developed, so a little over 3 are entirely in open space. So the on-site density of the whole 7 acres is about 5 units per an acre. But if you just look at the area, if you take the open space out, it's about 10 units per acre. So getting down to the size that Nate was talking about there. And so, 44 single family homes versus 9. And so that was a great example of a new neighborhood. Oh, you can go back. Sorry, Noah. So jumping over to manufactured home parks and communities, this is a huge part of our existing neighborhoods and our existing municipalities, but it's one that we also don't look at, and we almost have stigmatized it to the point of invisibility. What you're seeing here is Freedom Hill. This is 27 acres with 109 single family homes that this is a home ownership option. It's not a rental option. And I think that's really important when we're talking about wealth building and the opportunity to build equity, which is the key to our middle class here in America. This neighborhood is it's on city water and individual septic systems, and it comes out to about 10,000 square feet per unit, or about 4 acres per unit. And so when you look at manufactured housing parks, they were developed actually with community in mind. Many have many community amenities, and they're really great spaces for where people keep an eye on each other and really take care of each other as well. If you go to the next slide, another example is Mascoma Meadows here, which is also in Lebanon in Nate's area of the woods. This is 50 homes on 10 acres. And it includes a 1-acre solar array right in front. So with the Community Loan Fund, we worked with this resident-owned community and a grant from the PUC. And so this 1-acre solar array benefits the resident-owned community as a whole, and the community gets the benefit, and they've reduced everybody's rent. And they specifically chose to reduce the rent of those with the lowest income the most, to be able to offset for what they're saving through through the creation of solar technology. So there's really interesting ways that the community will work together to be able to support each other and stabilize costs, and to make sure that they are sustainable and successful.
We did, just to
So,
add to that, we did
yeah,
do some rezoning for that neighborhood so that if that park wishes to do some expansion, that they have the capacity to do so. Oftentimes, especially older mobile home parks are zoned out of legality. They are made legal non-conforming, and it's done intentionally to stop them from growing. And we actually started to go down the pathway in the 2023 reform effort for zoning. We added some things into reformed the zoning code in a way where this actual development is in a position where if it may be able to expand, as opposed to just simply being zoned out of existence, which what we have done to many of our mobile home parks and many communities across the country, really. So I think it's one where looking at what your zoning ordinance says relative to this use, because you may have an existing park that is in a position they can expand, that's very exceptionally easy way to get to affordable housing in short order.
that's a great point, Nate. And if you look at the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas, hopefully some of you have heard of the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas. It's you can Google it. You can see right on there, there's a layer that talks about where manufactured housing is allowed. And it's less than 9% of all the land area in the state. And if you look at it, it's pretty much exactly where it's located. And so just to dive in a little bit, because this is a little bit of a different idea. We have a lot of ideas of what manufactured housing is, but it really isn't what is reality today. So manufactured homes in New Hampshire, they are defined by RSA 674-31, but a manufactured home is not a modular home, and it is not a mobile home. They are not mobile. They are delivered on site. The axles and the tires and the hitch are removed, and they are installed on whatever the town codes is, onto a cement pad with rebar, and they are literally attached to that pad to meet all the current codes for snow loads and wind loads. And they are built to a very high HUD code standard. Just like our building code standards have evolved over the years, the HUD code standard has also evolved, and it actually has the newest edition is under review right now, under comment, but it includes a greater than Energy Star requirement across the board. So all new homes, if it passes the way it is, will basically be almost net zero ready. And we've seen several manufactured home manufacturers have just started adopting the new rules already. And so that they're only building net zero ready, as in you put solar panels on them and they are net zero homes to go forward. So a couple other things about manufactured homes, they are built entirely inside. They are never exposed to weather. Unlike all of our stick-built homes, they're never exposed to all the different things that can happen over time and over the time of the build, because they're built inside of factories and they are designed to be extra sturdy to be able to make that shipping process a safe shipping process. They're also designed to be incredibly efficient. There's almost no waste in the building of a manufactured home. We went to a factory not that long ago to see one, and at the end of the day, at the end of the factory line, when the house is completed, it takes it depends on the factory and the exact house, but between a week or 2 weeks to actually build the house from beginning to finish. And at the end, the waste fit in a 55-gallon trash barrel. That is not the case in the dumpsters you see on the lots of the stick-built home. And so it's an incredibly efficient way to build housing, which is what helps to bring down the cost. A lovely part about these neighborhoods is also that they're truly our neighborhoods. And while they are more dense, you aren't actually sharing a wall with your neighbor as you would be in a rental multifamily building or in some kinds of condos. It is your separate own home, and these are home ownership. These are an option for people to own a home and to build equity and to be able to eventually sell that home and grow up into the next level of housing, or to be able to have a place to retire into or to stay safely for a long time. Next slide, please. So manufactured homes also appreciate, and that's one of the things that people don't believe, is that they don't appreciate or that they fall apart. You can see here, this is a national study. Manufactured homes do appreciate, similar to traditional homes. And actually, if you can go to the next slide, Noah, what we've seen in New Hampshire in the past 5 years, and even more so recently, is that manufactured homes actually appreciated at a faster rate, at a higher value than traditional stick-built homes. These are the only homes in New Hampshire that have sold under $150,000 in the past couple of years. And so it's a really important part of a home ownership, affordable home base, wealth building that we haven't been considering as much. And yet it is a huge part of our existing landscape already. Some other things just to piggyback on this, the Carsey School at UNH did a national study that talked about how resident-owned communities homes in those actually appreciate faster than in investor-owned. And in resident-owned communities, they have really stable lot rents, only about a 1% increase over 10 years on average or less. Whereas in investor-owned communities, it's a 4 to 5% annual increase in that same study period. So next slide. So who lives in manufactured home? Essentially, when COVID hit, this is where all your essential workers live. It's an incredibly important place of affordable home ownership that our communities have, and we need the opportunity to be able to invest more in. And some of our resident-owned communities, we have everything from your grocery store and delivery drivers to LNA. One of the presidents of one of our resident-owned communities is a retired police officer, town clerk, teacher, nurses. And I think, Nate, you said that some of the people you work with at City Hall live in manufactured homes because they're
Absolutely,
a great ownership option.
Everybody needs a great facilities manager and somebody who can make things appear when you need them and disappear when you need it to go away. And that's our facilities guy. That's where he lives in one of the homes here in Lebanon. And he's been there a while. And it's a great option for him and works perfectly for what he wants to be and how he wants to do it.
Next slide, please, Noah. The other thing to note about smaller housing and specifically manufactured housing is that manufactured housing as a home ownership is actually the most affordable type of housing in the state of New Hampshire, period. Currently it's about $1,700 a month to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. And in looking at all the data we have, the median monthly cost of owning a home, of your mortgage payment, your taxes, your insurance, and your lot rent for a manufactured home is just over $1,500 a month. And again, you're building wealth when you own a home versus renting. So these are truly the most affordable types of home ownership of homes, period, available in the Granite State right now. Next slide. You might have heard me mention it a couple times, and maybe this slide should have been earlier in the deck, but what's a resident-owned community? So the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund started this idea about 40 years ago. And essentially, when a community comes up for sale, we help the residents to organize and to buy the land and all the utilities and everything that goes with it of their community. And they run these as little municipalities. They have annual budgets, they have capital improvements programs, just like your municipality does. And they are, and we provide any kind of technical assistance and training and governance and leadership. And it is an incredibly empowering ability for residents to learn how to run multi-million-dollar corporations on an annual basis. This has been so successful in New Hampshire that we actually created Rock USA, which is a national corporation now. Next slide, who does this across the country. The Community Loan Fund provides about 20,000 hours of technical assistance last year at no cost to the resident-owned communities, and there's 149 of them in the state of New Hampshire right now. And you can see from this map that these communities are everywhere, and they're probably in your neighborhood or near your neighborhood. So there's 149 of these in New Hampshire, in almost 9,000, a little over 9,000 housing units. And in the country, there's another 160 or so nationally. So New Hampshire is the birthplace of this, and it is an important part of this housing stock. Our resident-owned communities range from 4 to almost 400 units. And the only other really important thing I wanted to say is that when we do income surveys of our resident-owned communities, 75% of all the households are at or below 80% of area median income. So this is providing a truly affordable homeownership option for those who need it most to be able to live and work in our communities. And I'll turn it over to you, Nate, for the next slide.
Oh, yeah, I think Sarah and I got to meet each other, I think it was what I describe as perfect timing, as we were getting ready to put together our proposed zoning changes for the last fall. Sarah reached out to me about a potential project that was going to be happening here in Lebanon, and she described what she was looking at doing, and we created something that we call a cross-mod rezone request that went to the city council. And the idea is to be able to allow for a cross-mod home. So typically you have, if you follow a traditional development model, you're going to have the building code that'll apply, and anything that gets built, you have to follow that process, which we do that. We have our building permits, we do our building inspection, so on and so forth. But in the case of a cross mod, what you have is the main body of the house is actually being built under the HUD code as opposed to under the building code. It gets brought to the site. You then attach pieces that are built under the building code of the local municipality. So in this case, that's thus the cross mod. And we really started working together. This is really a partnership that was created with Sarah and her shop here at the City Hall, the folks here about, and then also DHMC. Again, you go back to who is the biggest employer, who is also one of the biggest landowners in the community. And they have become a major player in the real estate market in the Upper Valley because they've had to become a major player. And I think that's an area where we think of as we organize these types of land developments, looking at our incumbent employers and saying, if you want to help solve this problem, we need your help. You already own land that we could use. You already can get access to land that we could use to develop. And what we've seen here is DHMC, in partnership with the Community Loan Fund, is working on doing a cross-mod development in that 120 neighborhood that we were just talking about, where we're asking the people in the neighborhood what they want, we took a zone change to city council, ran it through all of our process of going to the planning board, the zoning board, the conservation commission. We held 2 public hearings that were sponsored by the planning department. We held a public hearing that was 2 public hearings that were sponsored by the city council, and it unanimously passed city council in January because it was one that did not trigger the need for a referendum in March. So we were able to get a zoning change done that allowed for cross-mod development to take place in what was a fairly focused residential, or a fairly focused zoning district that was created around the DHMC campus, that was originally aimed at what was likely going to be higher density apartment style development. And we've now kind of downzoned it a little bit to more the cross mod neighborhood, and with some goals of trying to get to a finished product that's going to be available on the market for hopefully in that 250 to 300 range. That's the goal. Whether we can get it to that is going to be interesting. I think that's on Sarah's shoulders a lot, but at the end of the day, we really were able to have the zoning change, and we embraced it as staff. The city council overwhelmingly embraced it and said, yes, we need to have an opportunity to create what is affordable housing. Even then, we look at it and we say, I still look at a $250,000 to $300,000 house as being, is that really affordable? Well, that's what we're defining it as. The median income or the median sales price, the realtors announced this month or this week, it's $515,000 is the median sales price for a home in New Hampshire right now. There are 1,200 houses on the market in the entire state. This is not a problem that's going away anytime soon. And I was playing with the loan calculator before we did our presentation. In order to afford the mortgage payments with a 10% down payment, in order to afford a mortgage payment on the median income, you have to have a family income of over $150,000 to qualify for that loan. Most families don't get to that world and aren't at that level and are not capable of purchasing a house with that. With those, the average house and the average family are not in sync at this point, and we're going to need to come up with some significant change, alter the market in a way where we come up with some real options. I think that is really the thinking behind the zone change that everybody just got behind, because one, we wanted to help DHMC, but more importantly, we need to help the families who want to get started in our community so they can stay here and live here and not have to, have some big giant carbon footprint as they're driving an hour to an hour and a half each day to be able to get to work. With this zone change, they hopefully will be able to get a neighborhood created that's in a more affordable range that will allow folks to have a commute of about 3 to 5 minutes as opposed to an hour to an hour and a half. So I'll turn it back over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Nate. No, if you wouldn't mind, next slide. So we have some pictures here of what cross mods are, and just to give you maybe go back one set, that's the cross mod too. That's the inside. So a cross mod is actually the newest form of Fannie Mae approved for financing and it's a new form of a manufactured home. This home is not mobile. It is put on a crawl space foundation or a full foundation. It is delivered in 1 or 2 pieces, and exactly as Nate said, that is built to the HUD code. These are all Energy Star or better. And most are net zero ready. And when they are delivered on site, a garage and a porch has to be constructed as part of them. And so these are just 2 of the models available out there. We actually have a great development in Plymouth that is just completed. That is a duplex version of cross mods. And so I can give you more information on that if you want to know where that is. I didn't have pictures here because I haven't had a chance to talk to that developer yet, but I'm happy to share some information on that. And you would not know the difference between this and a traditional home. They're also required by the Fannie Mae financing and federal law that they actually have to appraise against a stick-built home if there are not other cross mods in the area. What defines a cross mod, if you can go to the next picture too, you'll see they are permanent foundation, they have the covered porch and garage, they have the elevated roof pitch, they have the traditional drywall interior, and they have to meet certain energy efficiency standards. So these homes you would walk by and you would not know that they're a manufactured home, but what it does do is drop the price by about a third. And a third is a huge amount of money. It can be more than that too, but the actual construction costs are dropped by at least a third. If you're looking at a more traditional manufactured home, they say the construction costs are dropped by about 45 to 50%. So these are not quite as affordable as some of the traditional manufactured homes, but they are significantly more affordable than a stick-built home, and they are absolutely gorgeous, and you would not know the difference. So this is some of the new innovative options that are coming up and coming down, is trying to provide solutions to this affordability crisis. And I think that is the end. Here are some of the topics we talked about today in the last hour plus. And I think that is it for us, unless there's any questions.
And to think we didn't think we'd be able to, that we wouldn't be able to fill our hour. Boy, we filled our hour.
Yeah, we did. Thank you, Judy. I saw that comment. And so if our contact information is available, and if anybody has any questions, we're happy to answer them.
So I'm seeing a bunch of comments that, for the sake of time, I'm not going to read through all the comments. And I think everybody said it's very, very informative session. Let's just give folks a second to see if there's any actual questions. Sarah, I know you need to jump. So I'll give folks.
I know it's been a long day for everybody, so thank you very much for hanging with us through the end of the day. It was great to be able to talk to you guys.
So I'll give folks one more minute to put any questions in. Just as a reminder before we end the day, to please fill out the conference feedback survey for all the sessions that you attended today, so that we can hear, let all of our speakers know what went well, what didn't go well, and also hear what kind of sessions would be of interest to you for future conferences and trainings. All right, I'm not seeing, last call for questions. I'm not seeing any questions. So I think I'm going to let us all go 5 minutes early.
Wonderful.
Or be it
Great.
stand between anybody in this lovely day.
Right. There you go.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you all so much.
Thanks,
Thank you for
Noah.
coming
Thanks,
today.
Sarah.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.